Growing up, I learned early on that I wasn't the favorite. My name is Rebecca, and for as long as I can remember, my parents had eyes only for my younger sister, Molin. She was their pride, their miracle, their golden child. I was just the other one. It wasn't that I wasn't accomplished. I graduated with a degree in computer science from a respected university. I landed a solid job as a software developer and worked my way up. I paid my bills, kept to myself, and tried to make them proud. But it was never enough. Not when Molin existed. Molin wasn't just good at everything, she was exceptional. She was tall, slender, and beautiful, in the kind of effortless way that drew attention in every room. By age 10, she had already won every spelling bee and science fair in our district. By high school, she was prom queen, class president, and valedictorian all at once. She even dabbled in modeling while finishing her business degree, landing a corporate job right out of college with a six-figure salary and a corner office before she turned 30. When she got her first professional modeling gig, my parents threw a lavish party. They framed her headshot and hung it right above the fireplace. The same year, I graduated with my bachelor's degree. I got a half-hearted well done over dinner while my mom was already planning Molin's next photo shoot. It wasn't just about achievements. It was everything, how I looked, how I talked, how I lived. I'm shorter and curvier than my sister, and my mother never let me forget it. She used to say things like, "If you just tried a little harder, you could look more like Molin." She signed me up for fitness classes without asking and started me on diets by middle school. To this day, I can't smell kale without feeling a little sick. Still, I tried. I joined clubs they suggested, followed the academic paths they recommended, and even humiliated myself by trying modeling, just once. It failed miserably. Molin never let me live it down. Eventually, I stopped trying. Somewhere around my mid-20s, the desperate urge for their approval fizzled into quiet resignation. I started focusing on myself, my career, my small but loyal friend group, and the peaceful life I built on my own terms. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. We still saw each other at mandatory family holidays, where I'd sit through long monologues about Molin's latest promotion or exotic vacation. I'd smile, nod, and sip my wine while they barely asked about my life. It was easier that way. No expectations, no disappointment. But deep down, there was always a tiny ache. That child in me still wished they'd once say, "We're proud of you, Rebecca." Just once. Not because I was Molin, but because I was me. Then one day, after a tech conference in Chicago, I met someone who didn't see me as second best. He laughed at my dry humor, admired my brain, and told me I was beautiful exactly as I was. After 4 years together, he proposed in the sweetest way possible. Just the two of us at home, pizza boxes on the coffee table, and our favorite Netflix show playing in the background. I said yes. Of course I said yes. But when I told my parents, I should have known. I should have braced myself. They didn't say congratulations, they didn't smile. My mother stared at me and said, "Are you sure you want to rush into this? Maybe work on your appearance a little first?" And just like that, I knew this wedding wouldn't be about celebrating me. It would be another chapter in a lifetime of being invisible. After the awkward silence that followed my engagement announcement, I still tried to stay hopeful. Maybe they just needed time to process it. Maybe it wasn't about me. But the truth settled in slowly and bitterly, like the way my mom avoided wedding talk every time we saw each other. Or how she casually mentioned Molin's Pinterest wedding boards during our brunch, pointing out designer gowns and luxury venues that Molin wasn't even close to needing yet. I asked her once, just once, if she wanted to come dress shopping with me. Her response? "Well, if you're just going with something practical, I trust you'll make the right choice for your figure." It stung. The A-line gown I'd found made me feel beautiful for the first time in years. It didn't matter if it wasn't designer. It didn't matter that it wasn't Instagram-worthy. It felt like me, and that apparently wasn't worth celebrating. Meanwhile, my fiancé's family, especially his mom, stepped in with open arms. She offered to help with the guest list, venue research, even napkin colors. She made me feel seen, loved, like I belonged. And it was healing in a way I didn't know I needed. We sent out invitations, both digital and printed. I confirmed that my parents received theirs because the electronic invites showed red receipts. Weeks passed. No RSVP, no phone call, no "we're so proud of you." Just radio silence. I texted them, emailed, left voicemails. The only response I got was a vague, "We've been very busy. We'll check our calendar." The truth? They were too busy mourning the fact that I was getting married first. A few days before the wedding, my fiancé overheard them whispering on a call during our engagement party. They were huddled over my mom's phone in the corner, voices low but tense. He didn't want to ruin the night by telling me then, but I found out later. He heard Molin sobbing on the other end and my mom saying, "This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. We never thought Rebecca would go first." That sentence haunted me. Go first, as if love was a race, as if my wedding was some sort of betrayal just by existing before Molin's imaginary one. I tried to push through. My fiancé and his family carried most of the weight of planning while I kept hoping my parents would come around. But every time I reached out, they grew colder. My mother once texted, "Are you sure you're making the right decision? It's not too late to slow down and focus on yourself first." I knew what she meant. Lose weight. Give Molin time to catch up. Don't ruin the family narrative. The hardest part wasn't the lack of help. It was realizing that they were actively disengaging from one of the most important milestones of my life, not out of accident, but by choice. Still, I refused to let them steal my joy. We had a gorgeous outdoor ceremony in a blooming garden under soft sunlight. My soon-to-be sister-in-law hosted the sweetest bridal shower with homemade cupcakes and hand-tied flowers. Every guest who showed up made me feel treasured, even as 2 front-row seats remained painfully empty. And when the music started for the father-daughter dance, there was no one to take my hand. So my new father-in-law stood up. He didn't say a word. He just smiled, offered his arm, and led me to the floor. I don't remember the song. I only remember the tears that quietly slid down my cheek and how he held me a little tighter, as if he knew what that moment really meant. It was the dance I never got with my own father, and maybe never would. The wedding day was beautiful. At least, that's what everyone told me. It was a warm spring afternoon, just over 70 degrees, with sunlight filtering through the trees in soft golden beams. We held the ceremony in a garden that smelled of fresh roses and lavender, and everything looked picture perfect. My husband looked at me like I was the only person in the world. My in-laws were beaming with pride. Friends flew in from out of state, some driving hours just to be there. But despite all that beauty and love, 2 seats in the front row remained heartbreakingly empty. Those seats were reserved for my parents. When the music started and I stood at the top of the aisle, veil fluttering slightly in the breeze, I spotted those vacant chairs, and the weight of a lifetime of disappointment came crashing down. I had held on to a sliver of hope that they'd show up, even without RSVPing. That they would surprise me, walk in late, and whisper that they wouldn't miss this for the world. But they didn't, and their absence was louder than any vow spoken that day. During the father-daughter dance, I stood awkwardly to the side while my husband's dad stepped in and offered me his hand. He didn't say a word. He just nodded with eyes that understood more than I could put into words. I was grateful, but nothing could erase the sting of knowing my own father hadn't even bothered to show. After the wedding, I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe there had been an emergency. Maybe they'd finally call and explain. But when I reached them on the phone a few days later, I didn't hear remorse or regret. What I heard instead was blame. My mother's voice was ice cold. "You didn't send us an official invitation. You left us out, Rebecca." I was stunned. We sent paper invites and digital ones. I confirmed the delivery. I even followed up multiple times. "Well," she snapped, "I never saw it." No apology, no congratulations, just accusations that I had somehow sabotaged my own wedding to exclude them. I didn't argue. I just said, "I'm sorry you feel that way," and hung up. Not out of guilt, but because I realized something in that moment. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. They had chosen not to come, chosen not to stand beside me on one of the most important days of my life because I had dared to get married before Molin. It hit me then, in a way it never had before. My wedding wasn't just a day of celebration, it had become a battlefield for my parents' twisted obsession with maintaining their perfect family image, one where Molin was always the star. That night, my husband and I sat together on our porch, wine glasses in hand, watching the stars come out. He reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. "They didn't deserve to be there," he said, and for once, I believed it. 2 weeks after the wedding, the phone calls started again. This time, my parents weren't ignoring me. They were confronting me. My mother's voice crackled through the speakerphone, layered with tension and accusation. "Your cousin told me you've been telling people we refuse to come to your wedding. Is that true, Rebecca?" I took a breath. "I told them what happened, that you didn't show up, that you didn't RSVP, that you never supported me." There was silence. Then my father jumped in, his tone cold and sharp. "You're trying to ruin your sister's wedding, aren't you? Jealousy doesn't suit you, Rebecca." I froze. That was the moment I knew they weren't calling to talk. They were calling to defend themselves, to protect their image. They still thought this was about appearances. So for the first time in my life, I didn't defend myself. I didn't shrink, apologize, or try to win them over. Instead, I said, "You're right. I am jealous, but not of Molin's looks or career. I'm jealous of the love you give her so effortlessly, the love you never gave me." Silence again. Deafening. My mother scoffed. "We always treated you two the same." And something inside me broke open. Years of bottled-up grief came pouring out. "No, you didn't," I snapped. "You canceled my high school graduation dinner because Molin had a last-minute photo shoot. You celebrated her B's like they were Nobel Prizes and brushed off my straight A's. When I got my first job, you said that's nice and changed the subject. When I got engaged, you were disappointed that it wasn't her. You never once made me feel like I was enough." I was crying by then, not the kind of quiet tears I used to hide in my bedroom, but the kind that come from finally telling the truth, even if it shatters everything. My father tried to cut me off. "You're exaggerating. This is just your perspective." "No," I interrupted. "This is my experience, and the worst part is, you didn't even realize how badly you hurt me. Or worse, you did and you just didn't care." There was a long pause. Then my mother said something that sealed it. "We never thought you'd go so far as to sabotage your sister's wedding, but we always knew you were insecure." That was it, the final straw. They weren't hearing me. They weren't even trying. In their eyes, this wasn't about decades of favoritism and pain. It was about how I was ruining their plans. So I ended the call with 4 words I never thought I'd say: goodbye and thank you. Thank you for proving, once and for all, that I'd been holding on to the hope of something that never really existed. When I told my husband what happened, I expected him to be furious, but he just pulled me close and whispered, "I'm proud of you." And for the first time, I felt proud of myself too. 3 days passed after that phone call. I didn't cry again. I didn't rehash the conversation with anyone. Instead, I sat with it, quietly, calmly, like someone standing in the ashes of what used to be a house and realizing they'd stopped hoping to rebuild. Then came Molin's text, long, eloquent, and dripping with the kind of polished superiority she'd perfected over the years. She called my behavior entitled, said I was ungrateful for everything our parents had done. She even had the audacity to accuse me of using my wedding as a way to compete with her. And finally, she ended with, "Not everything in life is a contest, Rebecca. Try growing up." I didn't reply. I didn't even save the message. I blocked her number and went back to sipping my coffee like nothing had happened. But she wasn't done. Later that afternoon, my husband called me at work, practically choking on laughter. "You'll never believe who texted me," he said between chuckles. And what she said. It was Molin. She'd found his number, likely through a mutual connection, and sent him a string of manipulative texts. She called herself the concerned sister, claimed she was just trying to maintain peace in the family. Then she flipped the switch, accusing me of being emotionally unstable and prone to exaggeration. She suggested he take charge of me and help guide me toward healthier choices for the sake of the family's reputation. She even dangled some vague promise about how being connected to someone as successful as me could benefit you both. It was like watching a bad politician campaign for a job that didn't exist. My husband showed me the messages that night, and instead of feeling hurt, I laughed, not out of cruelty, but because the entire thing was so transparent it was almost sad. This was who she had always been. In high school, she tried to turn my friends against me. In college, she spread rumors to undermine my internship interviews. And now, when I refused to play her game, she tried to recruit my husband to control me on her behalf. But she'd miscalculated, because my husband didn't play games. He responded with just one sentence. "Thank you for your concern, but Rebecca doesn't need to be managed. She needs to be respected." That night, we sat on our back porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was still and warm. For once, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was peace. "I think I'm done," I said quietly. My husband didn't ask what I meant. He knew. Done with chasing approval. Done with apologizing for taking up space, done with pretending I wasn't hurt when I was, and most of all, done with trying to rewrite a story where I was never meant to be the main character. From that moment on, I wasn't going to center my life around people who couldn't even show up for me on the most important day of my life. Some people say revenge is sweet, but honestly, peace tastes better. It had been nearly 2 weeks since I blocked Molin, 2 weeks since I stopped trying to justify myself, and for the first time in my life, I felt still. But the peace I'd built didn't last long. My cousin Emily called me one evening. Her voice was cautious, but the words spilled quickly. "Rebecca, I just wanted you to know. Your parents are calling everyone." I paused, confused. "Everyone?" "Yeah. Family, friends, even Aunt May and Uncle Brad. They're saying you deliberately left them out of your wedding invitations, that you sent everything to old addresses, that it was all some revenge plot." For a second, the old panic gripped me, that horrible, familiar instinct to defend myself, to call everyone and explain, but I didn't. I thanked Emily and hung up. The facts were on my side. We had sent the invites, electronic and paper. We even had read receipts. Still, I couldn't help but feel the weight of it, that my parents were willing to lie so blatantly just to protect their perfect image. The same image they prioritized over my joy, my milestones, my existence. A week later, during a family brunch hosted by my husband's side, I ran into my Uncle James, my dad's brother. He'd always been quiet, neutral, the peacemaker who never took sides, but this time was different. "I owe you an apology," he said, hands trembling slightly as he poured his coffee. "I saw how they treated you. For years, and I stayed silent." I didn't know what to say. He continued before I could respond. "I won't be going to Molin's wedding, not after what they did to you. It's not right." His words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I needed validation, but because after decades of feeling invisible, someone finally saw me, and it wasn't just him. Bit by bit, the wall my parents had built started to crack. Word spread. Cousins quietly dropped out of the wedding. A distant aunt who owned the boutique where Molin's dress was being tailored suddenly had schedule conflicts. Even the luxury venue mysteriously became unavailable. Apparently, when you build a reputation on manipulation and half-truths, it doesn't take much for it to crumble. Then came the breaking point. At a casual family cookout, someone asked my mother about my wedding pictures. Her face turned red almost instantly. She launched into a tirade, blaming me for turning the family against them, accusing me of always trying to compete with Molin, and insisting they were the real victims. But this time, people didn't stay quiet. One by one, relatives spoke up. "What about the time you skipped her graduation dinner? Didn't Rebecca pay for her own college while Molin got everything handed to her? She always smiled through your coldness, and now you blame her for telling the truth?" My mom stood frozen, her wine glass shaking. My dad looked away, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The same people they'd relied on to maintain their perfect image were now peeling it away, layer by layer. No yelling, just truth. Later that night, I sat in bed with my husband. He handed me his phone, a screenshot of a text from one of our cousins. "You didn't ruin anything, you just stopped pretending, and we respect you more for it." I exhaled deeply, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. This wasn't the revenge I had once fantasized about. There was no dramatic scene, no screaming match, just quiet accountability. And maybe that was more powerful than anything else, because the truth? It doesn't always need a microphone. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to speak it, then walk away. Just when I thought I had reached emotional closure, my phone lit up with a message that pulled me right back into the storm. Only this time, I didn't drown in it. It was from Molin. Her message was long, carefully worded, and laced with that same polished superiority she'd always worn like a crown. The first line read, "What you said to Mom and Dad was totally inappropriate. You're blowing things out of proportion because you're insecure." That one sentence managed to unlock a vault of memories, years of being compared, dismissed, diminished. But instead of igniting a fire inside me, it triggered something else. Calm clarity. Molin's message was a masterclass in gaslighting. She insisted our parents had always done their best, and claimed I was trying to destroy her special day out of spite. Then came the real kicker. Not everything needs to be a competition, Rebecca. Competition, that word echoed. All my life, I had tried to compete for love I thought I had to earn. But now, standing on the other side of emotional survival, I could finally see the truth. There never was a competition, because only one of us had ever been allowed to compete. The other had already won before the race began. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Silence in this case was power, but Molin wasn't the type to tolerate being ignored. A few hours later, my husband called me at work, barely able to breathe between laughs. "You're not going to believe this," he said. She had found his number. Using whatever mutual connection she had, she sent him a series of texts, starting off civil, then spiraling into a condescending monologue about how he had a responsibility to help me be reasonable and guide me toward understanding the family dynamic. It was laughable. She even tried dangling her professional success as a reason for him to side with her, saying things like, "Maintaining ties with successful family members like me could benefit your future." He read it aloud that night while we sat on our porch, watching the sky turn orange. I was half laughing, half stunned. Molin had always been skilled in passive aggression, but this was next level. The old me would have been shattered, believing every cruel insinuation, doubting my own worth again. But the woman I've become. She laughed, not because it wasn't hurtful, but because it was so transparently manipulative that it had lost all power. My husband, ever composed, replied with just one message. "Thank you for your concern. Rebecca's happiness is my priority. If you have concerns, I suggest you speak with her directly. Have a good day." Molin didn't respond for hours. Then finally, one last message. "I see she's poisoned you too. Don't say I didn't try." That night, as I sat with my husband, I felt more validated than I ever had growing up. Not because someone chose sides, but because someone saw me clearly and stood beside me without hesitation. Molin's attempt to divide us only made our bond stronger. Her tactics, once so effective at turning people against me, now crumbled in front of a man who refused to play games. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the lesser daughter. I felt like someone who had finally stepped into her own story. 2 weeks had passed since Molin's failed attempt to manipulate my husband, and while I thought the dust might finally settle, the storm was only just beginning to brew on their end. It turns out my parents weren't done. According to several cousins, they'd been making frantic calls across the family, spinning a new narrative, that I had intentionally sabotaged Molin's wedding and was lying about them skipping mine just to gain sympathy. They told people I had sent the wedding invitations to their old address, even though they've lived in the same house for 30 years and still use the same email they created when AOL was the thing. But their plan backfired. Instead of rallying support, their desperation started to crack the pristine image they had spent decades polishing. Aunts, uncles, and family friends began sharing their own stories, moments of favoritism, subtle cruelty, and Molin-centric antics that suddenly made more sense. My Aunt Denise, who had always stayed on the sidelines, called me out of the blue. "I just want to say, I see you now," she said softly. "We all saw the signs. I just never realized how deep it went." One by one, relatives began pulling out of Molin's wedding. A few even backed out of the bridal party. Apparently, some vendors backed out too, citing scheduling issues, though I wouldn't be surprised if it had more to do with reputation than timing. And I didn't have to say a single word. I stayed quiet, kept to myself, and focused on my own life, on building joy with my husband, growing in my career, and watering the friendships that poured love into my life without conditions. But then came the family BBQ. It was supposed to be casual, neutral ground. My husband and I showed up with a homemade pasta salad and polite smiles, ready to keep the peace. But the minute someone asked if we had any photos from our wedding, my mother snapped. She launched into a tirade about how I'd changed, how I was trying to tear the family apart with false stories. Her voice cracked, her hands trembled. For the first time, she looked small. And I? I didn't say a word. The room fell quiet. One of my uncles put down his drink and simply said, "Maybe you should ask yourself why people believe her so easily." That silence said everything. I don't need to convince anyone anymore. The truth has its own voice, and it's louder than all their excuses combined. Later that night, my husband said something I'll never forget. "They built an image for so long, Rebecca. But when it's built on lies, it only takes one gust of honesty to blow the whole thing down." And he was right. The burden I carried for so long, the need to be understood, to be seen, was lifting. Not because I forced anyone to pick a side, but because they saw the truth for themselves. For once, I wasn't the problem child. I was simply the daughter who finally stopped apologizing for existing, and it felt like freedom. Sometimes the most powerful decision you can make is to stop chasing the love you never truly had and start honoring the love you give yourself. This story reminds us that approval, when conditional or weaponized, is never love. Rebecca spent her whole life trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided who was worthy. But in walking away, she discovered a deeper strength, the ability to choose peace over validation and truth over performance. One of the most powerful lessons here is that your self-worth is not determined by who accepts you, but by how you learn to accept yourself. In a world that often rewards appearances and image, this story is a call to return to what matters: authenticity, integrity, and emotional freedom. Another lesson is the importance of boundaries. Rebecca's silence was never weakness. It was restraint. And when the moment finally came to speak, her calm honesty said more than any argument ever could. She didn't retaliate with lies or cruelty. She let the truth rise naturally, and with it, her healing began. The collapse of the perfect family image wasn't revenge. It was reality catching up. When you stop protecting people from the consequences of their behavior, the truth will do its own work. This is not just a story about a daughter breaking free. It's about reclaiming your narrative from those who always tried to write it for you. So if you're listening and see pieces of your own life in Rebecca's story, know this: you are not alone. You are not too sensitive. You are not too difficult. Sometimes people need to lose your silence to finally hear your truth. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel, Reddit Family Files. Your support helps bring more real, raw, and relatable stories like this to light.